Thank you so much, Rasmus, for that wonderful overview. We'll sort of try and bring some optimism back into the mix from the point of various newsrooms. I'm Felix Simon. I'm the research fellow in AI news at the Reuters Institute. Welcome to the panel on how three prominent newsrooms are using AI. I think it's pretty self-explanatory what this panel is going to be about from the the headline. And I'm delighted to have three fantastic people with me. One of them joining us from New York, two of them in the room. I start with Nathalie Malinarich. Did I get that right?
You got it perfect.
Amazing. To my left, who has spearheaded the BBC's AI strategy and implementation over the last years, and was recently also announced as the interim director of the new Department of Growth, Innovation and AI, where she will oversee the BBC's efforts around personalization using artificial intelligence. Also with us online in this case is Dylan Freedman. After starting out in the tech industry, Dylan became a journalist with stations at the nonprofit Document Cloud and the Washington Post. He's now at the New York Times, from where I think he's currently joining us, where he works as a machine learning engineer and an investigative journalist, and is part of their team working on various AI initiatives for the NYT's newsroom. And finally, I'm also delighted to have with us Liz Lohn from the Financial Times. Liz worked for many years in the travel sector and startup scene before joining the FT in 2023, where she now leads a product team on a mission to accelerate various sort of AI product developments at the Financial Times. So this is a wonderful panel. To kick things off, I asked each panelist to give us some examples of how their organizations have used Gen AI. So we will have each of them present for roughly 5 minutes on this before I will try and pepper them with some questions. But of course, I want you all to get a chance to ask something as well. So I will use the final minutes to open up the floor. We also should have a short online survey where you can sort of give your opinion on something relating to the panel. So do please vote. But now we're sort of, without further ado, I think we go, let's briefly have the vote first. And then I think we will go to Dylan, and I will have to basically play his sort of presenter, because otherwise, he doesn't have access. So just say next slide, please, and I will do the job. Take it away, man.
I am going to talk mostly about investigative journalism use cases because that's sort of been my beat at the Times. And we've been using AI a lot, but primarily as a background element in these investigations. And so I'm going to talk about a few case studies here. This first one is going through various appearances on TV by various cabinet members ahead of their Senate confirmation hearings. So we did something where we went through all the footage of Tulsi Gabbard over the past 10 years via news channels using the Internet Archive's repository. And we used AI to kind of search those transcripts for particular themes that she was talking about that we expected she'd get drilled on at her Senate confirmation. So things like, Edward Snowden or Russia or the CIA or Syria and Assad, things like that. And AI was really useful here to do kind of like an inexact match for certain keywords. We also did this for Pete Hegseth. And for instance, we were looking at ways he's talked about alcohol in the past on Fox News. And using large language model prompting over every single transcript block, we were able to find instances where, for instance, one of his co-hosts is talking about a small town in Tennessee named Hendricks. And he says, oh, that gets me thinking of something else. And he doesn't explicitly use the word gin, even though Hendrix is a brand of gin, but the large language model with a very specific prompt is able to kind of intuit that that might be alcohol related. So the workflow we use a lot is kind of assigning a 0 through 10 score on every single minute that someone's talked about something, and then we sort those scores in the background and manually review every example. So the human is still kind of in charge and able to make the executive judgment of what's important. So needle in a haystack is kind of the main theme there. We also use some facial recognition to pull out, when is Tulsi Gabbard actually speaking in these video clips, because the transcripts are so voluminous. So that's another use case. You can advance the slide. This was a recent one that we published on which words are disappearing in the new Trump administration. And this was a great example of using AI in multiple ways as well. We extracted text. So first we kind of had a manual workflow where we were automatically screenshotting government websites. And so we had over 5,000 of these screenshots. We used AI to basically extract the text, like OCR the screenshots and pull out their raw text form. And we compared before and after and basically used another very nuanced large language model prompt to search for changes. And part of the challenge is kind of like, something like equity can be used in various contexts, like financial, but also social justice. And so the large language model here again is able to kind of go beyond keyword search by intuiting a little more and being very accurate at understanding if this change is actually kind of notable or might be ideologically motivated. And it was also useful for finding changes that actually occurred in Spanish and other languages. And so kind of like this idea of AI is very useful for transformation, like going from one form to another, like images to text, or videos to transcripts. And then it's also very useful for needle in a haystack, sifting through large amounts of media, documents, or text and surfacing the changes. Next slide. And so finally, I wanted to highlight one where we actually looked at our own archive, our own like column. The 52 places to go is something the travel team puts out every year. And for their 20th anniversary, they wanted to understand, what are some of the similar themes we've been talking about this whole time? And so we used large language models and we used semantic search to kind of sift through 300,000 words of articles for these concepts and themes. And it was very useful to use semantic search. Again, if you do, use keyword search, something like sustainability is not really being talked about in the early 2000s. That term was not popular. But semantic search is able to kind of understand conceptually what sustainability means. And we found we were actually talking about that a lot in the early 2000s, just using different language. And so the travel team was able to publish a great, retrospective of their coverage and also include a feature on how our team was able to help them. So that's what I wanted to highlight in my slides, basically ways that we have assisted investigative reporting and other types of political reporting as a background element in the process, always with human review at every step along the way.
Yeah, investigative journalism is something we use AI for a lot as well at the FT, but I wanted to kind of go into a slightly different part of the newsroom, so more on the news presentation and production pipeline. And to start off, I wanted to talk about how we actually come up with ideas and the tool we developed early on when we kind of set up an AI-specific team last year that we call AI Playground. So that's a pretty basic internal tool that connects our existing content, either published or still in draft, to the LLM in a safe way that doesn't send that content in any places we don't want it to go, and allows everyone in the newsroom to experiment with prompts. And it basically works in two ways, either with a broad search, and it uses the RAG pipeline to extract segments that are relevant. So someone can search for, like, give me a brief on everything that Trump said on Greenland over the last 20 years, and then that would pull in articles and segments from the article specifically, which then a journalist can decide what to do with and generate a prompt and test the output, and then iterate on that prompt and see whether they get to a good prompt, and create something like a timeline, for instance. Or the other way to use it is to predefine the article, saying, actually, I want something very specific. This is the article I'm working with. Can you help me with some revision, finding some inconsistencies in this article? Or if it's already published, turning it into a simplified version, a shorter version, a summary for the social media post or something like that. So this was the way we empowered the newsroom to come up with the use cases that are actually helpful, but also that produce good quality, because that was the biggest question at the start of the last year, where we should even focus our resource as the product and tech team. So out of that came a few things. I'm going to talk you through two of them. So this is hopefully going out live, so you're probably the first ones to see it, but it's going live next week. And it's a discussion prompt that is inserted in the article itself to drive readers to the comment section and then to discuss the article within the comment section. Someone in the previous panel was saying about community being the place where we can actually invest more of our time as news media, not just the content. And we see the proof for that as well. Our engagement really increases. So the users who do engage with comments actually more engaged with the content itself, are more likely to continue subscribing. So it is an important part of the brand and of the value proposition, the other people they talk to. But also apparently about 60% of people don't even know that the comment section exists. So the problem was around its visibility in the first place. And there was lots of ideation around how to approach it, and how exactly to prompt people to comments and how to kind of highlight the value of joining the discussion. And a few ideas were investigated, like summarizing the comments or maybe selecting the most important comment, all with AI. But kind of like all the areas around doing something with existing comments felt a bit too risky or needing too much human oversight, so not being scalable eventually. So instead, what we went for is using AI to read the article and then suggest what question would be relevant for this article to then ask. And then within the article, about 2/3 of the way, inserting that question that will then take people to the comment section. That is also human reviewed. So 3 options are offered to our audience engagement team, and they're going to select the one that goes actually live. So we hope to see some changes in the quality of the discussion, which is going to be more qualitative, but then also the engagement metric that is the main one to drive. And the second example is what we call content transformation. And initially it started with the bullet point summary. So the thing that is now live as an experiment is summarization of one article into 3 bullet points. Again, we've heard from our readers, and something we just had to accept, that they do copy-paste our content into other AI platforms and just do something with it. And summarization has been the most frequent use case that they've been doing with it. So we just thought we should offer that opportunity within our platform rather than trying to pretend it's not happening. And we've tested with the single article that the hallucination level is actually quite low because the content is quite neat and condensed. We also iterated on the prompt quite a lot to make sure it is very clean and like double checking itself. And we felt pretty good about it. And the one you see on the screen is human reviewed as well. So there is a draft in our content management system that an editor looks at and then publishes to the reader. The interesting thing was we were looking at the changes in engagement. So we needed to change a little bit how we think about engagement, because the traditional way is the depth of reading, and obviously when we offer a summary, that assumes the reader may just look through the summary and actually stop reading the article. So we needed to look broader at the session length, at the number of articles within the session, and the more kind of like longer term habit formation of the reader. And we saw that there wasn't too much negative impact actually even on the article depth, and a little bit of a positive impact on the overall engagement of the reader. The interesting thing we needed to change and fix, and the challenge we had, was the actual user experience. The first version had 1 bullet point summary already shown, and then everything else you needed to click expand or collapse. And we kind of realized that we went lukewarm. We showed a little bit, but not everything. We didn't want the summary to be too much in the way of people who don't want it, but also to tease a little bit, and that didn't work in terms of engagement. So we made it a bit more explicit. So now the reader needs to click and generate. And for those who don't want it, it's just a tiny blue button. And the most exciting outcome of that is that looking at how much the editors need to change it, no one needed to change anything factual. So it's been live for several months now, and only some small stylistic changes have been made to the actual output. So these are the 2 examples, more kind of on the reader facing side, human in the loop as well.
I guess like many other newsrooms, we're trying similar things, and I think I'd categorize them in 2 ways. We've got tools that help journalists do their journalism. So investigations, verification, passing data, and then tools that help us amplify our journalism, get them further. Things like summarization, translation, and all those things. And a lot of our testing's internal, and we've got a few audience-facing ones, including translation. But the ones I wanted to focus on are slightly different. So the first one is around detecting deepfakes, and this is for stills. And this has been created by the BBC's R&D team working with the researchers at Oxford University and with our BBC Verify team. So it's only in use by verified journalists at the moment, and they're testing its accuracy and doing all the kind of human processes they would normally do. But from what we can tell, it's kind of at 90% accuracy, which we're pretty happy with. So if you look at the heat map, it's kind of showing you where the eye is focusing, so the points where it's focusing. So we need to develop this further, and I think the next step will be things like adding explainability, so that actually can be used in the writing of stories or in the explaining how we got to this point. I'll just show you an example of a fake. This is a very well-known fake, and so what the detector is able to do is it kind of can crawl Google as well and see actually there are already lots of articles about this, but it works even if that doesn't happen. And I tried it with a grab from Instagram the other day that I just spotted, and it worked equally well, and it gives you a percentage of confidence, which I think is also really important. And as I said, kind of we really want explainability in this, and also thinking of can we build some agents around this as well to do other bits of the process, so that in the end you get a much more rounded view of whether something is a fake or not. And I think this is really exciting. I think, obviously the premise is that we're going to get much more of this, and we are seeing more of this. Doing it with stills is the first step, because we know a lot of it will be video and audio is very challenging, I think. So the next tool is quite different, and I'm cheating a bit because actually it's not developed by news, it's developed by sport, but I love it so much that I thought I'd bring it. And the challenge here is that, people love their sport, and there are lots of matches, football matches, that aren't televised, and we don't do live pages on because we just don't have the resources to do every single match. So a team in Wales working with sport decided actually what can we do if we take local commentary from radio and put it into a live page. So we take the live radio program, it gets transcribed live through Azure, built a GPT, and that GPT, what it does is it detects key moments, so goals, penalties, and other things that happen in football matches. I'm not an expert, you can tell. And what it does is you get the transcripts, and it will start offering you key quote summaries and those key moments. And that goes into a live page once it's been edited by a human. And this is what the editorial team sees. So if you probably can't see at the back, but you've got the event, which is a goal, then you've got the quotes around it, and then you've got a full transcript so you can check against it. And we've also done summarization, so it's 40 minutes in and they're 1-0, whatever. This is how it appeared to audiences. So apparently this was one of our most popular pilots on this experiment, Cheltenham Tranmere. The live page got a bigger audience than we would have had on the radio. It wasn't televised. And what we're seeing is actually audiences really appreciating the fact that their local team is being covered. And the final point I want to make on this is I think they've done the transparency really nicely. So they are telling the audience that they are using AI to assist this. It's really important to us. It's been covered a lot this morning about how we talk about transparency. And it's difficult because I think for people who don't trust AI, actually that might make them not trust this. But we think doing it this way, which is actually quite chatty and saying, hey, this is how we're using it, this is how we're checking, has actually really helped us in this. So those are two of the very different tools we're using. And obviously this is a sport example. We have separate newsrooms, but we are I think this is a really nice model when you think about how much news we have on the radio at the BBC, just kind of thinking about how this might apply as well, and just making a lot more of the coverage we have, the great interviews we have, and all that.
Just briefly, I shall report on the results we had from the online survey where we asked people, do you think the news industry should double down on the use of AI? Where 46% said yes, 26% said no, and 28% were unsure. We'll run that briefly at the end again, just to see if your presentations have maybe changed those views at least a little bit. I shall look forward to those. But thank you so much for these incredibly interesting examples. In terms of sort of a couple of things I would like to go into, I think we've heard a lot around the benefits already. We know it's sort of helping journalists do deeper work, doing things that ultimately otherwise would not have been possible. That was sort of the example from Dylan. In many ways, it's augmenting the tasks or the works of journalists at both of your places. It also, in your example, it allows you to do a bit more with less, if you will, and sort of making things possible that otherwise would not have happened. So I think we have a sort of reasonably clear picture on the benefits. The thing that would interest me, and probably a lot of people in this room and online, is what were sort of the hurdles you faced in getting those projects shipped, as they say these days? Like, what were the challenges in getting to the stage where you actually have these sort of live examples of AI in use? Let's maybe start with you two and then go to Dylan.
Yeah, I've kind of alluded to that a little bit. We started with, so the way we arrived at that AI playground that I showed was by making a mistake and not giving enough power to the newsroom and actually assuming which use cases we should develop and kind of like trying to strategize around it and prioritize in abstract. And something that, like, first of all, as we were building it, we came across quite a bit of disconnect and frustration, I would say, probably from the people we needed expertise from to actually build the right prompt and the right solution, because they didn't really think they needed that for their job. They enjoyed that part of their work that they were doing and were also like flatly scared that the AI is going to take their job from them, and they're basically supporting that process. It took us too long to get the first version out, and actually the first version didn't stick, and we ended up not releasing it, basically rolling it back. So that led us to a much more collaborative model, and I think that was a great conversation to have that brought everyone on the same page, that we cannot just top down inform the newsroom how they should be using the new technology. They should be part of the change. They should have the motivation. They should have also the opportunity and time allocated in their capacity to experiment with things, not necessarily ending up being productive, but just for the sake of experimentation, just getting familiar with that. And that really kind of like turned the corner and brought people a lot closer together, who were like scared and excited, and everyone has become a bit more normalized around moderately optimistic, or what was the term from the previous lightning talk.
Absolutely.
I think there are very different challenges for the two things I shared. So just thinking of the deepfake detector, I think it struggles a bit with compression, for example. And again, if you're just taking pictures of Telegram, that is a problem. And the other problem is obviously these models move so fast. So the challenge is keeping up with the models and the changes. And also you are using, the best team to make sure this works is the team that's also working full time on verifying. So again, and I think this happens with a lot of our internal testing, where you are asking the teams who are doing the journalism and have a very busy day job to also verify this because they are the experts. It's not a hurdle, but it is a challenge, and it's definitely kind of being mindful of how much pressure we're putting on teams to do many things. I think in general, there are big challenges when we're testing things with systems that aren't ours, around data protection, around intellectual property and all that, and that's kind of always front of mind. So it's how you do it, and do you just create a kind of safe space, a sandbox for people to try things before you decide to go all in, is always one of the considerations, I'd say.
It's basically sort of a mixture of the people, the tech stack, and everything else that comes along with it, and then finally the question of how do you assess it. Sort of things changing. Dylan, what's your experience at the New York Times, both in the things that you sort of worked on and the things you've seen other people do at your very big organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll talk about kind of both those things. I think one thing to realize is, these AI models are not perfect, but if you can get them to be, more perfect than not in most cases, it can still be very useful. So the key is designing use cases for using these tools where it's okay if there's some amount of error rate, and then designing it so that there's a human in the loop during that process. But the thing I worry about kind of more than false positives is false negatives, this idea that, maybe we're going down this AI rabbit hole for some project, and we would have gotten better results if a reporter just used their own expertise to go through the data set and find better examples. So I worry about, being overly reliant on AI. And so I think part of that designing of these use cases is to have it be complementary to reporter expertise the reporters are the real experts here, and AI is kind of like this tool that we're wielding to be able to get better results. And then, I mean, I think organizationally, you want to get buy-in from reporters and other people in the newsroom who are rightly skeptical. And so we've been going around to like different desks and doing road shows where we share use cases, talk about how these projects work and different techniques that people might not be aware of, how we can tell more stories that would otherwise go untold. And also, just empathize and say, like, we're kind of skeptical as well. Personally, I'm not too big into like AI generated copy that doesn't interest me as much, or I worry about shifting the burden of verification to the reader or something like that. So I like using it more as a background element. But there have been other projects that we've tried using AI in outside of just investigative reporting. We're doing a lot with like, looking into generating alt text as a first pass that then people can go over and edit. And another example is like we were investigating helping power the site search with some amount of AI, not necessarily like generative text, but just more specific search results to find better articles. But integrating into a large engineering stack has its own challenges, especially when that stack kind of powers a lot of core features of the site in other ways that you wouldn't expect. And so there's still some ongoing work, just figuring out ways to integrate non-disruptively and complement our already like impressive array of technology we have.
Right. Could I briefly get the view of the panel? How do you measure sort of success, or what counts as success in those different contexts? If I sort of look at this as an academic who studies this from various angles, I quite often have the sense that we're sort of almost vibing our way to utopia. We sort of assume that AI makes a difference in those contexts, in the news and those processes. But when I sort of press people and like, okay, how do you actually know that this is the case? How do you measure that? What are the metrics for all those different contexts? And it's quite often sort of a situation where you get crickets and people are like, well, we don't really know. Which is not to say, I mean, in some cases it is being measured, but quite often it's a lot of experimentation, the hope that it will make a difference. So how did you three approach this? What are the sort of workflows around this to measure, does it actually help?
Yeah, I can go first. So I kind of touched on some of that with the specific things that are reader facing. Mostly we are looking at engagement, and as I said, we need to redefine engagement because the ways that were like article-based journalism is kind of like going away a little bit. So we're now thinking about habit as the main metric, and if we can increase that, which is tied to loyalty and the brand staying top of mind for the reader, that is good. And we have good ways to measure that, mostly through experiments, A/B tests on different user segments. But the trickier side, I would say, is when something doesn't necessarily have direct reader impact and is just part of the workflow and is aimed at ideally optimizing the workflow, because then we go into the whole, has it become more efficient? Have we saved any more time? And if we're saving time, how does that convert into actual money? It only converts into money if that means we are cutting costs. If we're cutting costs, again, are we talking about losing some jobs? We don't really want that. So the way I prefer to talk about it is doing more with the same. So actually producing more, or producing higher quality without needing to hire more people. So rather than saving costs, it's doing more with the same when we talk about efficiency. And then the experimentation itself has its value in driving the velocity of development and the velocity of change. So for us, the existence of this new team allowed to speed up overall product development across the board, to kind of create an example of, these changes so fast, we cannot afford to have an experiment that takes 3 months to build, because the models are going to get released, everything we know about users is going to change. And that in itself is a metric that I think is super crucial to drive in the world we're in right now, when technology just moves too quickly.
Thank you. Nathalie?
I think quite similar. We have different success metrics for each trial, and there will be things ranging from internal things like, if you take translation, is it faster? How long does it take to edit it? So how accurate is it? But also, if you take, I think translation is quite interesting because we do a lot of it. We have more than 40 languages. But actually what it does help us with is it allows us to be more timely, because if it's quicker, then you can translate more. So again, there are benefits that the audience might not immediately feel, but you see them in the numbers. And it's really different for different things. So we're doing a summarization trial as well, and it's kind of, again, it's accuracy, does it save time? And in the end, are people more likely to do it? Because we tried to get people to do it manually and they didn't. So, maybe it'll take us to a place where we couldn't get to before very easily.
Thank you. Dylan?
Yeah, there's a few different ways. I'll start with like kind of more of the hard metric of success when we're using these large language model prompting over thousands of rows of data. We might like grab 100 and manually annotate them ourselves and then see to what degree the large language model aligns with like this is important or not, or relevant to some reporter query or not. And then we iterate on the prompts until we see, we're able to get better results. And there's always edge cases that come up and always iteration we have to do. But I think we also like compare, like if you are actually to train a traditional machine learning model to do this kind of task, we often see that it's like less good than these large language models just out of the box, which is some of the real kind of power of these tools. But outside of like those very hard metrics, I think there's all these soft metrics of success. I think the most important one is just like we're doing the same thing we've always been doing, which is telling the best, most powerful, most engaging stories that we possibly can. And if AI can help us be more ambitious with those aims, that's great. Like one example I like a lot is we got this like leaked trove of Zoom meeting recordings from this far-right election nonprofit. And we received this dump of recordings in like October. The election was in a month, and it was 400 hours of footage, which is more than the amount of time left, before the election actually began. And so it would literally be physically impossible to kind of listen to all of these videos. And so AI was able to help pinpoint examples there. And we iteratively prompted that and found examples and talked with the reporters and refined what we were looking for. And we're able to get much, very good examples that we were able to show in our story. Another thing is just like I mentioned we talk to significant portions of the newsroom and kind of go desk by desk and share these use cases. And a big metric of success is if people who attended those meetings kind of come to us afterwards and are like, hey, we want to collaborate with you. And it's kind of this positive reinforcement cycle where the better storytelling you're able to do, the more people will want to participate in that. And then just lastly, I'll say like, I've been doing a lot of things where I'm kind of using similar approaches over and over again. And so trying to standardize those into purpose-built tools that we can spread around the newsroom so more reporters can do the type of things that I'm doing. We can spread our capabilities and pursue kind of more ambitious things.
Terrific. I like this sort of emphasis on the human elements of talking to the people in the newsroom. Being mindful of the time, we've got about 10 minutes left, so I will ask you, we've got plenty more questions that I could ask you, but I'll try to limit it to one, and then I will hand it over to the audience and see what they would like to ask. But what kind of work remains to be done? What's sort of next for you, if you can say? Maybe starting with Nathalie and then I'll go to Dylan, to Liz.
Well, I think for us, as I said, a lot of our trials are just internal facing, so it's making the decision to make them audience facing and try them with real audiences. I think we, unlike the FT, I think we don't have AI tools embedded in our content management system. So I think there comes a point where if you're having to go to too many different places to do the work, you're kind of eating up all the time you've gained from using those tools. So to us, that is a big piece of work, just thinking about how this works. And because the BBC is very big and does very, very different things, you kind of need to balance that. We share content management systems. So I think that's a big thing. And I think we have a new editor for AI starting at the end of April, coming from Swedish Radio, where he's done some amazing stuff. So we're very excited.
Shout out to Oliver.
Shout out to Ole. Hopefully you're watching. So we do have, really excited to ramp up that work. So at the moment, it's kind of been part of many people's jobs. And I think just the focus will really help us.
Thank you. Dylan?
Yeah, I think just kind of bigger ideas, trying new things, constantly experimenting, getting our hands dirty, like bigger data sets, like going through everything in the congressional record or every single thing a group of politicians has ever said and trying to deal with that kind of data. And then like more creative applications or ways to, I think one of the challenges with constructing these prompts is you have to really explicitly lay bare all these assumptions we have just as journalists about what's important for this story. But is not intuitive at all to a large language model. You have to very explicitly mention that. So different ways of dealing with that. But the biggest one, I think, is just like I recognize, I'm in a very resourced newsroom and have a role where I can experiment with these things. So giving back more to the community or local newsrooms via open sourcing tools or sharing approaches more is, I think, kind of the big next step to be done.
Thank you. Liz, anything you want to add?
Yes, I think from our side, two big challenges are first scalability. So the human in the loop is important, but that means we are creating kind of new tasks for the newsroom that is not necessarily an exciting task, just reviewing and babysitting the AI. And we already have a product that's called AskFT, where it's a Q&A, and it is just the reader interacting with our content, and it is experimental and it can hallucinate, but then because people know they are actually interacting with LLM rather than this is the journalism, the perception of it is very favorable, so they understand what's going on there. So looking for that place where AI can actually help build experiences that do not need a human and actually do provide the reader value and are more scalable is probably number one. And then the second one that is a little bit FT specific because of how much we write about economy and numbers is mixing the text like generative AI with more traditional AI in presentation of the data. So giving the context to numbers, and on the contrary, when there is an article, giving the context in the shape of numbers in a more automatic way, which isn't a really well technically solved problem at the moment because it requires different sets of technology.
Wonderful. All right, and with that, we should go into a Q&A. We will also launch the survey that we had at the beginning again, just to see if the numbers have changed. No pressure there. And basically, we'll have microphones in the room. I would ask my team if there are questions online to pick one and sort of send it to me via Teams, and then we'll ask one online question and maybe start with people in the room. So if anyone has a question, please raise your hand and Paul will head to you with a microphone.
Hi guys, thank you for the presentation. I want to know if you have been doing some personalization, content personalization, or if you have some experience, or the audiences, how are the audience reacting to personalization, if you do some project about it.
Who wants to take that?
Can do. Yeah,
sure.
Happy to go for it. So we kind of look at the three pillars, I guess, of personalization, not necessarily personalization. We look at curation, which is brand level, editorial curation, customization that the reader does for themselves, so setting up the things they subscribe to, and then personalization that is more automatic recommendations and things like that. And we've got personally curated lists of articles or playlists of audio that is based on our in-house built models, basically. So nothing there, all very similar to what Spotify would do with your music. The interesting bit is the reaction that you asked about, and we did some research there, and we actually talked with Felix about it a little bit, that readers are interested in what goes into personalization, especially in two cases. One, if it's bad and they receive something irrelevant, so they want to influence that and say, hey, actually, you got that wrong about me, change that. Or if it's really, really good, and then it feels creepy and like, oh, am I giving some information to you that I was not supposed to? But generally, it tends to drive good click-throughs and like long engagement. So the numbers are good, but the more qualitative trust element does build around the transparency of how it works.
My name is Karen. I'm a journalist fellow at the Reuters Institute over here. My question is for Nathalie, and with regard to the deepfake detector that the BBC has created, I wanted to know if you noticed any differences in detection outcomes when it comes to synthetic images depicting people of different ethnicities, and whether you took into account this factor while building the training data, and also if you had any insights while creating this detection system that could be applicable to actual pictures taken by BBC photographers, whether you could use some watermarking system, then that could be interoperable in that way.
Could you pass the microphone to Chris until we just take his question as well and then get quick answers?
Sure. Hi, thanks for those presentations. It's really interesting. So when you were speaking, you were kind of implicitly alluding to a bunch of ethical principles that you're employing. You're talking about things like human in the loop being good, content faithfulness is important, personalization might be scary. There are all these things. I'm curious about where these principles are coming from and what governance procedures you have in place for making those kinds of decisions.
Amazing. And quick answer from Nathalie, and then I'll pull Dylan and Liz in response to Chris's question.
Should I start with the first question?
Go for it.
So that's an excellent question. And to be honest, I don't know. No one has flagged that as a concern. So I'm assuming, but that could be the wrong assumption, that it's fine. But I will check and get back to you because it's a really good question. In terms of watermark, we are part of C2PA. So we do have that already and working with lots of other news organizations as well as Adobe and other tech companies on that.
Amazing. Dylan, Liz, do you want to briefly respond to Chris?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think what's so interesting about it is all these newsrooms are doing it differently from what I've experienced. At the Times in particular, I was hired onto this team that was very recently created, the AI initiatives team led by Zach Seward. And the mandate of that team is to come up with these kinds of principles in close consultation with leadership and then share those principles with the newsroom. And so those principles kind of came from that sort of structure. And I think that helped assuage kind of reporters who were concerned that these might be like top-down decisions coming from management. I was very skeptical about AI during my interview. So I think the fact that I was hired shows that, we're thinking very thoughtfully about this and not trying to use AI as like a hammer in search of a nail, but really a carefully chosen tool for use cases where it makes sense.
This just very quickly, is that similar at the FT?
Yes, we've got a group of people who came up with a set of principles that we look at as like the precedent law. So we're saying, yes, this is the principles, but then they may change in the first place. And then how they exactly apply. For that, we've got a use case panels, multiple, that actually review the things we want, like the applications, I guess, coming in and say, okay, this is the judgment on this is yes, no, or yes with this recommendation, like a recommendation on transparency or a recommendation on considering a different provider who is lower risk. And then through use cases, we kind of aggregate and abstract away into more generalized principles when things change, technology changes, and it's kind of a living mechanism through that.
Thank you. Amazing. I think I have to wrap up. Just briefly, the results from the final survey. So again, do you think the news industry should double down on the use of AI? And this time that has gone massively up. We have 61% saying yes, they should. 20% saying no, they shouldn't, and only 19% any longer saying they're unsure. So you have made a difference, positive one. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dylan, for joining us online. I'm sorry we couldn't have you here in person. Thanks to Nathalie and Liz. Thanks for the great questions. And yeah, there's lots more to discuss, especially in the ethical aspects, but we'll leave it here and hand over to Nathalie, our director, and the final panel. Thank you so much.